Moon Knight has finished its run on Disney Plus after 6 episodes, another limited series in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This one starring Oscar Isaac, Ethan Hawke, and May Calamawy, and F. Murray Abraham as the voice of the Egyptian god Khonshu. This show tackles the story of Moon Knight, who is a less popular character in the comic books, and in that medium, he was essentially a brutal, schizophrenic version of Batman, a former mercenary beating people up at night at the behest of the Egyptian god Khonshu, who perhaps bestowed him with some mild superpowers, perhaps didn't. It was usually left intentionally ambiguous. And one of the big things about Moon Knight was always his fractured psyche, the fact that he had several different personalities within a single body. The show opens with the personality of Stephen Grant, a mild-mannered, everyday, regular, normal guy working in London at the British Museum. And as we quickly learn, he sometimes blacks out and loses memory for periods of time, often finding himself in places he doesn't remember going to, etc. As it turns out, it is because of his other personality, Mark Spector. He takes over during those blackouts. And together with Stephen, we begin to sort of unravel and explore the mysteries of his life and what the other personality was hiding from him. As at the same time as the charismatic cult leader Arthur Harrow seeks to awaken an evil Egyptian entity to judge people for their sins. That's the most basic outline of the plot, not to spoil too much beyond the first episode. So my biggest fear for the show was always that it would be too sanitized and safe. After all, it is released on Disney Plus, which is a family-friendly platform, and the original comics were some of the most brutal shit I've ever read. I mean, it was on par, sometimes even more brutal than Punisher. One of the more famous moments of Moon Knight involved in the comic books involved him defeating his arch nemesis and then skinning his face completely off and then wearing that skin sometimes on his face as an insult. That's how fucked up it gets. So the show, by comparison, is very much safer, but it does still make a point of Mark being a killer with many sins in his past, and I thought it also has a clever way of establishing that he is brutal without showing the brutality take place, by using the blackouts from Steven's perspective. So the fight scene will start and Steven is in control, and then there's this like blackout effect. For 1 second, he sort of wakes up again, looks around, and all the enemies lie defeated, all bloody. Which is a nice compromise, if you ask me, because it works well as a storytelling device as well. The best part about the show, though, are the performances. Ethan Hawke is very good as the villain, but Oscar Isaac gives a stellar performance, one of the best in the entire MCU. And he essentially carries the show on his back. He plays 2 roles effectively, and he's mesmerizing in his ease with which he switches between the 2 personalities. You can always recognize which one is in charge at any given moment, even just by the way he walks and his posture and his face. He doesn't have to say anything. Really amazing stuff from him, and it makes the show work best when it's focused on his character, on this character exploration, which is why episode 5 of 6 in total was my favorite, because it's the most focused on the central character. Because otherwise, when it goes into the regular Marvel-style superhero action, I thought the show was a little lackluster at times. The fight at the horse riding ring in episode 3 comes to mind. It was just so. Some of the other sequences didn't work very well for me as well. I'm not entirely sold on the suit being CG. I think I would have liked it better if it went for a more grounded design. And I also felt that the show ends a little abruptly. It almost feels unfinished, like there was one more episode, especially with one major plot point, which is not only not resolved, but almost just revealed at the end for the first time, suggesting way more story to explore, which would be great. But Oscar Isaac mentioned that his contract doesn't involve... he doesn't have a contractual obligation to return to the MCU. For now, it's a one-and-done season. So we'll see whether we get to finish the story of Moon Knight or not. One more thing I wanted to point out, which is a very personal take. The thing I had the biggest problem with is not so much with what the show is, but rather with what the show isn't. And what I mean is the ambiguity that I mentioned regarding the conscious existence in the comics. I absolutely loved this aspect of the character, this constant question. Is he a superhero, or is he just a mentally ill, troubled vigilante who imagines things? And I would have loved for the show to lean into this, but pretty much from the first episode, it's never a question that all the supernatural stuff does in fact exist. So I have the feeling that, you know, it could have been so much more interesting and adult, and as it is in many ways the usual Marvel stuff. Yes, it does explore the mental health and the multiple personality stuff, and it's very character focused and so on, but it's not really groundbreaking enough to call it revolutionary within the superhero genre. It's fine, I thought. The performances are fantastic, the rest is alright. It's worth checking out, especially for Marvel fans.